Hello, everyone. We're back after a little break for some more Peak Human. Sorry about that. We got a lot going on with Food Lies, with Nose to Tail, with all the projects, Sapien Center in Austin. You know, I only like to have good episodes from people I really care about, great doctors and scientists. And I don't have to have episodes when I don't want to because I have no sponsors. I am my own sponsor. My only sponsor is my own company, Nose to Tail. And we actually do have a new product we've been working on. It's really great. It's actually the only supplement I take because I hate supplements, but it's not really a supplement because it's a single ingredient whole food. It's just oysters from Ireland, fresh and pure, not the shell, just the meat inside with all the nutrients in it. So many hard to get nutrients: selenium, zinc, vitamin B12, iron, copper. This is the stuff you need, and people don't get enough of it. So we put it into a pill. A lot of people know about the organ pills, which are great, right? Liver, heart, kidney, spleen, get them in your body. But this is even better. This is stuff from the sea. This is stuff you don't get a lot of, and it has huge effects. I'm telling you, it works well. It makes your hormones work better, boosts your testosterone. There's some science on that. Maybe it's a lot of zinc. Maybe it's a lot of these hard to get nutrients that your body just needs, and it starts functioning better when you get them. So check that out at nosetail.org. Sorry, I went on a little tangent here because I'm excited about our new product, but back to the podcast stuff. This one is with Dr. Cate Shanahan. She's my pal. She's great. This is the third time she's on. This is the third book she's written called Dark Calories. Highly recommend it. It really goes into the science of why seed oils are bad. So much more than just about seed oils, but there's a lot of controversy here. There's people saying that they're not that bad, or the studies show this, or the studies show that, or even people in our space, people who agree with animal-based diets and are against seed oils, but they have the wrong idea of why they're bad. So she spells it out for you. This is a great one. Go back, listen to all the old ones. People are complaining there's no new episodes coming out. Well, go back, listen to the old ones. They're just as good. I'll get some more ones out quickly. Yeah, well, enjoy the show. Check out nosetotail.org. Get those oyster pills. Get those nutrients in your body, male and female, reproductive health, hormone health. They're amazing. So grab those while we still got them. We just did a short run to try them out, and enjoy this one. Thanks. All right, we're back with Dr. Cate. How's it going?
It's good, Brian. It's good to see you again.
Yeah, last time I saw you, we were filming for Food Lies in Dr. Bill Schindler's food lab.
Yeah, like near DC.
Yeah, that was awesome. And Dr. Cate is a legend. If people don't know her, she's written many books. I've read them over the years: Deep Nutrition, Fat Burn Fix. Also, the best part, she showed up to the interview from Florida with raw milk and kimchi packed in her bag. Amazing.
Yes, that's my travel gear, essential travel gear.
That was so amazing because we stayed. Dr. Bill Schindler put us up at a house that the university owned or something. And I was
From like
with my,
1820 with rickety stairs. It was gorgeous, but it was really antique.
it was great. And you had your raw milk and thick, great raw milk and the kimchi. Oh, that was such a great time. So since then, yeah, we've gotten the Food Lies series into a series. Back then, we were just talking how it was a film back then. Now it's a series. So just to update the audience real quick, Dr. Cate's in it, huge part of it, and it's going really well. We're trying to talk to all the big platforms, get it finished. And yeah, let's talk to Dr. Cate today about her new book, Dark Calories, which I just finished about 20 minutes ago.
It's fat, it's big, so it takes a long time.
Yes, I just barely finished it. But let's go into it because it's your third book. Have you written more books?
Well, yes, that's actually my fourth, because there was a self-published one that I did in 2010 called Food Rules. It's very small, just like it was supposed to be sort of like the amuse-bouche, where deep nutrition was the full course dinner on what does a human diet really look like. And it's kind of like the executive summary of it. But yeah, so it's still up on Amazon all by its lonesome now, because it's the only self-published book that I did remaining.
Well, your other books are amazing. Yeah, like big successes. I send people Deep Nutrition when they get pregnant, either Physical and Degeneration by Weston Price, which you know love and draw info from, and then your book too. It's super important. Give us a quick overview of deep nutrition, I guess.
Yeah, so Deep Nutrition really is the book that I feel defines what a human diet actually really is and what a human diet does for our health, as well as what does actually health look like. And I'm really standing on the shoulders of Weston Price. I'm updating his great seminal work called Nutrition and Physical Degeneration because he was on the right track. Weston Price was such a thought leader, and his ideas, I don't think any of them were invalid. And some of the key things have been totally validated. And that's what I bring the science, the newer science in there. He talks about how he didn't even really know genes weren't really identified back then, but they were called germ cells. And he talked about how diet changed the expression of the germ cells. Well, that's why the subtitle of my book is Why Your Genes Need Traditional Food, because then there's this whole field of epigenetics that shows that our diets, our gene expression, and they can actually change literally our DNA so that our children inherit different DNA thanks to what we ate, right? That's why it's so, so important to know what a basic human diet looks like. And that's what deep nutrition defines it as the 4 pillars of the human diet. And, it just helps people nail down what our ancestors all did. What do they all have in common? It's the only book that addresses that and answers that and shows you that you can recognize health in our skeletal development. It affects how we grow, not just how tall we are or how fat or thin we are in our muscles, but the structure of our face. And so it's so important to know this before you have a child. And it's not anything that I learned in medical school. Doctors still don't learn any, I talk about the importance of bone broth and of uncooked foods and organ meats. And these are things that actually OBGYNs tell their patients to avoid, some of them, right? And fermented foods aren't part of the American diet, but it's so important now. So anyway, all of the Price stuff has been validated. He was on the right track. Deep Nutrition, even though it was originally written more than 10 years ago, I haven't had to change anything. I've just built on it. And so the Fat Burn Fix is my middle book that talks about what is a human metabolism? What is metabolism? I define it. It's the only book that defines what metabolism is, and it explains how a bad diet disrupts it. And then with Dark Calories is the first book to define what is even processed food. Talking about processed food is bad for you. Ultra processed food, it's a big buzzword these days, right? Probably had people on talking about it, but
Mm-hmm.
they don't really define how you can tell what it is. Well, Dark Calories does that. And it also is the first book that defines exactly why ultra processed food is so deadly, why we have all these studies that show that the more processed food you eat, the worse your health. And Dark Calories explains all that. I'm going to get into some of that.
Absolutely, and all the seed oil stuff too. We were also talking about the seed oil stuff before we started because it's great. There's a lot of people who are getting seed oils now, right? It's kind of a
Yeah.
popular meme. Before, a couple of years ago, you could go around town and no one really would know it. Now I go around town and people get it. I could meet a random person and I can hear them be like, "Oh yeah, I avoid seed oils." I'm like, "That's great. You've heard about this," but they may not know why, or they may have some bad info, or there may be some influencers that aren't really giving the correct science out there, and which leads to the debunker kind of trying to debunk the wrong thing.
Exactly. So, yeah, so I've been talking about these oils since actually my first publication was in 2006, but I've been speaking to doctors since 2004. And the reason that they're bad has to do with something called oxidation. It's a chemical principle. Is actually what kills us at a cellular level. It's what causes disease at this cellular level. It's where disease starts, with oxidation. And if you've heard of antioxidants, it's supposed to control that stuff. That's why antioxidants are important. But because we don't really understand how seed oils are contributing to oxidation, then what's going on is the people who are talking about seed oils are talking about sort of a rabbit hole of the truth here. They're talking about mostly linoleic acid and omega-6 being inflammatory. And there's a lot of people who focused on that. But that's not the problem. The problem is much deeper and much more chemistry oriented. People have just glommed onto this term omega-6 being somehow inflammatory, which is based on some verifiable truth. There's some real biochemistry, behind that. But it's not the big picture. And because folks have been not looking at the big picture in oxidation and not really a lot of people out there don't quite understand the concept of oxidation. That's why I wanted to write Dark Calories so that, the next generation of influencers would be better informed. Because what's happened so far is by focusing on this wrong rabbit hole, well, the debunkers, the people out there defending how healthy seed oils are, have an easier time because they're knocking down basically a straw man, right? That linoleic
Mhm.
acid isn't the problem. And this is also a problem for just ordinary consumers because the ordinary consumer is so confused, right? Like you've probably run into that in many of your interviews. There's all this conflicting information. And the ordinary consumer is like, well, I don't understand. I'm supposed to avoid linoleic acid. It's somehow inflammatory. And what they see is all these lists of foods that have linoleic acid, right? They mix up this conversation around highly toxic vegetable oils. There's 8 of them. I call them the hateful 8. But then they start saying that any food with linoleic acid is a problem, like almonds and chicken and
Hmm.
really, tons, like everything. Many foods have linoleic acid. And so that is just contributing to the noise and making it very difficult for the average consumer to really get to the truth themselves.
Yeah, no, it's important to have this accurate info, and I did learn some stuff from the book. And there's also a bigger problem than just the influencers. It's that the mainstream people, doctors, World Health Organization, USDA, that's the bigger problem is they all don't understand this. And so they're saying seed oils are perfectly healthy. They lower your cholesterol, right? This is stuff left over from the 50s, 60s. This is, well, what Food Lies is going to go into. But that's a bigger problem, right? Is that the mainstream doesn't understand why they're bad.
Right. I mean, when I first started learning this back in 2002, I was completely alone. I was literally, in the middle of nowhere. I was working on an island called Kauai, one of the smaller islands of Hawaii that I know you're very familiar with, Brian,
Mhm.
because you live
Yeah.
there. But I was there all by myself, and I was I was finding the evidence that the whole idea that cholesterol and saturated fat are bad for us was based on just one man's opinion. And that's the problem. And that medical science is still wrapped around this false idea that cholesterol is bad, that saturated fat is bad. And all of medical science is distorted because this nutrition idea is wrong, but
Mhm.
it's really the nugget of all of medical science. It's the nugget of all of nutrition thought. There's this mixed up idea that saturated fat is bad. And so all of nutrition science has since been distorted to fit this wrong
Mhm.
paradigm. It's
It
kind of like the Kepler model of like the universe versus the Copernican model, where you have the sun at the center of the solar system, which is the truth, but you tried to create this model where the earth was at the center and it was all these ridiculous planetary motions that weren't making any sense, and it's not the truth. And right now our whole body of nutrition science is just like that.
That's a good analogy because there's so many preconceived notions and biases that everyone's using like going into these studies, assuming that saturated fat is bad or assuming that cholesterol is bad, and it's shaping the science for the last like 70 years. Right? So
Right.
they have the wrong model. That makes so much sense. If you have the wrong model, they're trying to make it fit and it's not working. And so when you change the model, the people I interview, like you, have a completely different paradigm, and then everything makes sense, right? The world makes sense. You're like, ah, the sun, I get it. It's at the center.
Yeah. Yeah. And then so you realize that, your doctor is miseducated, and this has so many complications that are just upsetting because you go to your doctor who, maybe has helped you with infectious diseases or with, acute problems. Maybe you have a long-term relationship with your doctor, but then one day your test comes back and your cholesterol's high, and now suddenly he wants to put you on a statin drug. And he's still living in this distorted paradigm where the only way to prevent heart attacks is by smashing your cholesterol levels down to practically zero, taking statins and following a very unhealthy diet. And now you've seen this other world where life makes sense, and you understand that, the foods that you're supposed to eat today are the same foods that we were supposed to eat 100 years ago. And those two paradigms have, are totally incompatible. And this actually has made well-meaning primary care physicians agents of chronic disease. People don't realize that they go to the doctor's office to be proactive for their health for a physical exam. That can be a slippery slope, because if you find out that your cholesterol is high,
Mhm.
then you're told to shift your diet. And I've worked with so many people that were put on statins that were just fine until their doctor said, no, you have to, stop eating butter, you have to stop eating meat. And then they started developing like aches and pains, or they got even more serious diseases like autoimmune disorders. This is what happens when the paradigm is wrong. When the medical paradigm is wrong, it's a disaster for patients. And it all comes down to the lie that we got from Ansel Keys about saturated fat.
Do Please do a little recap of the Ansel Keys stuff because some people haven't heard it, and that was a good chapter of your book.
Yeah, so I talk about Ansel Keys in a way that I don't think anybody's noticed before. A lot of people have talked about Ansel Keys and
Mhm,
his 6 country study, which was supposed to be a 22 country study, but he edited out the other, was 18, 17, 16
mhm.
studies, that countries that didn't align on the graph. So that's been, it's common knowledge now for everybody but doctors, unfortunately. And the other thing that he did was the whole American Heart Association was corrupt. It wasn't just Ansel Keys. And this comes back to a date in 1948 when the American Heart Association voted. Do they want to accept money industry so that they can do more research and come to an understanding of the root cause of heart attacks quicker? That was the argument of one side. Or do they want to kind of remain pure and, not likely to be influenced? And that was the other side,
Mhm.
the minority side. So the minority side was outvoted, money won the day. And just a few months later, after they voted to accept money, along comes Procter and Gamble dangling $1.75 million, just donated it to the American Heart Association. Procter and Gamble sold cottonseed oil and soy oil. And so who reached up and grabbed that money? Keys, because he wanted to, do research to prove his preconceived idea. And vegetable oil that they sold was low in saturated fat. So while his original studies had focused on fat, his studies after that started focusing more on saturated fat,
Mm.
which enabled the entire American Heart Association to start promoting vegetable oils as heart healthy.
It's Yeah, I mean, that's like the where it all came from, and people don't know this story, and it can be as simple as that, is if you get one thing that wrong, then the whole paradigm is backwards.
Yeah, because, well, like, it's an important thing to get wrong, because when you take away saturated fat, you take away animal fat. And when you take away animal fat, you take away the bulk of calories of most traditional human cultures, right? There were a few vegan, vegetarian human cultures, not very many, not multi generational. So you take away all of cooking, and suddenly people don't know what to eat anymore, and they have to eat processed food. And that's summary of the past 200 years of nutrition science, how it was used to push people towards processed food.
Well, so this is my thing because I like to be a conspiracy realist, where, I don't know how we could have gotten it so wrong. That, some people say, "Oh, it was just some bad science, there's a mistake." But, I mean, you're talking about how money was driving this, but, like, how could we think that something that we've had for all of history is suddenly the problem and causing all the modern disease? So my conspiracy realist, it just points me to, like, it wasn't a mistake. Some people just blame it, "Oh, it's just we got some things wrong," or the food industry, it just happened. But I just think it was pushed that way.
Yeah, definitely. It was both. So it was like any disaster, like the Titanic. It wasn't
Mm,
just that the guy on the lookout didn't have his binoculars. It wasn't just that they didn't have enough lifeboats. It wasn't just that there were engineering flaws. All of it. Any true disaster has
mm.
multiple different root causes. And, without any one of these things, we wouldn't be here. So, pointing to one man is always, I think, important because it makes the story simpler. So
Hmm.
Ansel Keys is the one most evil man. But I agree with you. Certainly there was money to be made. I mean, that's what Procter and Gamble knew that. They knew that. Here's what I discovered when I was doing the research for dark calories. I discovered a man named Ed Bernays. And I don't know, had you heard that name before you read Dark Calories?
Maybe. Well, because I read hundreds of these books, he is a PR guy.
Yeah, so I hadn't heard him mentioned in any nutrition book, but
Mm.
marketing experts have heard his name because he's considered the father of modern marketing. And yes, back then was called public relations or propaganda. And propaganda did not have the negative connotation, but it was propaganda. So Ed Bernays is this genius who was related to Sigmund Freud, the father of modern psychiatry. He was his nephew, and he understood the power of emotions thanks to Sigmund Freud. And so he just applied that to advertising. And previous to Ed Bernays, advertisers would appeal to people's logic with facts, like this tire is thicker than the other tires, like
More durable. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, facts and price and practical points. But Ed Bernays said, no, 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 you can manipulate people with emotions and they don't even know they're being manipulated. So one of his first things was to help sell cigarettes to women, which he did by calling
Mm.
them Torches of Freedom. He just came up with that name. And Torches of Freedom, smoking women from their status as, trashy, basically. That's how they were looked on in the 1910s to liberated. It basically liberated them. Torches of Freedom. They are independent thinkers, right? So he had that kind of a genius that he could just manipulate people. And he never even, so he, and he's responsible for the American Heart Association's choice to donate. It's Ed Bernays who's responsible for the American Heart Association's choice to donate money to, I keep saying it wrong. It's Ed Bernays who's responsible for Procter and Gamble's choice to donate money to the American Heart Association, right? Ever knowing probably Keys himself, but Ed Bernays was savvy enough to know that you wag money in front of a bunch of doctors, somebody's going to volunteer to align their ideals with the dollars. And it was Ansel Keys who stepped up. He started, he wasn't really interested in selling vegetable oil. He was interested in being the guy who discovered the cause of heart attacks that were at that point in time in the late 1940s. Heart attacks were a mystery, but they were killing more people than they do today. And the reason is because of cigarette smoke. Like people were smoking like chimneys in the 40s. But Ansel Keys downplayed the role of cigarettes, and he wanted to the world to call him basically the father of modern cardiology. And he got his way because he had the money behind him. He did create a whole bunch of studies called the 7 country studies, not the 6 countries, the 7 country studies, which are still they're at the root of all of the guidelines that doctors learn today. All of the modern guidelines refer to earlier studies that refer to earlier studies that all build off of this pile of fabricated, not very useful data that Ansel Keys created with money from Procter and Gamble.
It all makes sense and you go back, and then everything's just built on that, and then it's just built on money and momentum, and yeah, it's just like if saturated fat's bad, then vegetables are good, and then processed foods now get greenlit, and this whole industry takes over, and then all the textbooks are written, and everything's in place, and it's really hard to change things once they're in place.
Yeah, yeah. The funny thing is we've kind of managed to do that with sugar, which, sugar is also bad for us. And there were a lot of similar scandals with sugar and scientists at Harvard accepting money from the sugar
Mhm.
industry and keeping that secret. And then, making sugar look, actually somewhat healthier, and the
Mm.
other thing about sugar is all of sports nutrition is corrupted by Gatorade, right? And that's still in place. But about sugar are becoming more and more clear, more well known, thanks to the whole keto movement and the low carb movement. But what really still has not been properly fleshed out is the role of these vegetable oils in driving metabolic disease. And that's what I wanted to get into with dark calories, because the keto diet today, the keto diet doesn't work unless you're also avoiding vegetable oils. And
Mhm.
that's been proven. And I put the evidence together in chapter 3 and a few other chapters in Dark Calories, where they've actually tested the keto diet as far as its ability to reverse diabetes. They've compared it to a high carb diet. And when you do a keto diet versus a high carb diet, it doesn't do any good. It's no better than a high carb diet. You're still eating the seed oils. Full
Mm.
stop. It doesn't work.
Mhm.
So it's not the ketones. It's not the fact that it's low carb. The problem we've had all along with our metabolism was never sugar. It's been vegetable oils. And really, it's been oxidative stress, because, we did have type 2 diabetes before vegetable oils, but was the oxidative stress wasn't coming from the vegetable oils back then. It was coming from things like alcohol and severe malnutrition that also promote oxidative stress, which drives type 2 diabetes.
So that's the ultimate root cause. So yeah, we'll get into oxidative stress. I always love to get to the ultimate root cause. I also like to be in camp, no camp. So you're right. I don't blame sugar, right? Like before, when I first started this 10 years ago, I was into the low carb stuff, and then you blame sugar for everything. Well, sugar's not healthy, like you said, right? Just empty calories from sugar, terrible, right? But like our body should be able to consume glucose, right? Our body can run
Right.
off glucose. We can consume carbohydrates, whole food carbohydrates. We're fine. We cannot blame that on this. And we can't say that ketones are magic unless, well, if you have epilepsy, right? There's lots of like therapeutic uses for, specific, bad problems, diseases, stuff like that ketones can help with. But it's not that ketones are just magic. I think you're right. There's a deeper root cause to any diet that works or diets that don't work, right? It's like it goes down to the mitochondrial level. It goes down to the oxidative stress.
Yeah, the magic isn't ketones. The magic is a healthy metabolism. And the magic is being able to control oxidative stress and minimize oxidative stress. And vegetable oils make that impossible. So do the other elements of highly processed food. So does smoking. So does the lack of exercise also makes it difficult, right? There's other things that contribute to oxidative stress. But the biggest of all of them are the hateful eight toxic vegetable seed oils. So maybe I want to talk about like what makes them different. I got a
Yeah.
really good basic question today. Some of the best questions I get that come, from social media, where people are like,
Mhm.
"So wait, why is olive oil okay and vegetable oil isn't?" Like,
Mhm.
that's a really good basic question. So, the difference between healthy oils and unhealthy oils is that the hateful eight that I've identified are absolutely unique and different. They are industrial products, they didn't exist before the industrial era, and they have toxins in them that don't exist in healthy oils. Those toxins occur because of the refining process, because of how they're made. So, to let's compare olive oil and how it's made and how, let's say, soy oil or sunflower oil, any of the hateful eight, how they're made. Very different. So olive oil, you could make that 1,000 years ago. You could probably have made
Mhm.
it 10,000 years ago if there were olives. So as soon as we had olives, we're bred to be oily. Over many generations of plant breeding, the olive got more and more oily because we liked that. So at some point, the olives got so oily that we realized that instead of just having that delicious, satisfying olive, it was so oily, you squeezed it and oil came out. And then you could start using that for other cooking purposes instead of animal fat, which would have been the only fat at the time, right? So one of the very first plant oils could have very well have been olive oil. But the olives are so oily that you just take a heavy stone and squeeze with the weight of the heavy stone, the oil comes out. That oil tastes like olives, it's green in color, and it has lots of nutrition in it because it's fresh from the olive. So there's all kinds of vitamins and antioxidants, good stuff. And it doesn't need refining. Good quality oil, call it extra virgin, or when it's slightly less great quality, it's called virgin, but it's not refined. Now, soy oil, on the other hand, was never part of the human culinary story. Even though soybeans were cultivated for thousands of years throughout Asia, never used soy oil. I don't know if you knew that, but
Mm,
that's a real
no.
key thing to understand. That those soybeans, they were never bred to be oily. They don't yield their oil easy enough. What you have to just squeeze it, not like that olive.
Mhm.
You can't just use a heavy stone. You have to use intense heat, like 400, 500, 600 degrees, depending on the process. You have to use intense pressure. Very often they use a solvent like hexane that has to be removed. Now, so that means that oil you get, the first that comes out of soy, they call it the crude oil. It is inedible. It's toxic. It's got toxins in it. Certainly the hexane is toxic, but even if you don't use hexane, soy oil that can be called organic is still toxic when it's first extracted because of the reactions that happen, the chemical reactions between those fragile polyunsaturated fatty acids, oxygen, and the other things in the seed. They all get mixed up and glommed up together with that heat and the pressure, and it's just a sludgy, disgusting mess. That is the origin story of all the hateful eight oils. They start as a vat of disgusting, foul smelling, vomit producing, slime that, and I say vomit producing because if you were forced to eat it, all of the toxicity in there would burn your esophagus, would burn your stomach, and you would regurgitate it back up. That's your body's protective mechanism. So it's inedible. And there's nothing like that in the food supply. The refining processes are extensive. They take many factories. You have to degum, de-wax, you have to deodorize, you have to bleach, you have to wash it. There's all kinds of things you have to do to make that crude oil immediately toxic. And we call it edible. But even as it leaves the factory, Brian, it still has somewhere between 0.06 and 5.2% of abnormal, unnatural fatty acids in the bottle. There's nothing else in the food supply that we consider food that contains known toxins.
Wow. And then what? And then, well, we make it worse too by heating it to high temperatures.
It just goes downhill from there because those toxins that are what they are is they're broken up bits of partly oxidized polyunsaturated fatty acids. They're shorter molecules. And those shorter molecules now act like catalysts, turn around and can attack the bigger molecules. This is just the chemistry of it. And that can make more toxins form. That happens, the polyunsaturates that these seed oils are so high in are so fragile. They shouldn't be around these toxins. They shouldn't be hit, they shouldn't be struck by UV light. They shouldn't be exposed to extensive heat, not in the presence of like meat or anything that contains metal ions, like, iron ions or vitamin C. Even vitamin C can start more toxins forming once once these oils are processed, because the processing, in addition to creating all these toxins, the processing strips out the vital antioxidants that were protecting those fragile polyunsaturates while they're in the soybean. That's why it's not harmful to eat soybeans. That's why linoleic acid isn't the problem. The toxins that the processing linoleic acid into, you're not going to get that from eating whole food. You're not going to
Mm.
get the toxins from eating whole foods.
People knew this too because the good olive oils, they have the thick, dark bottles, and people knew this before even they knew the chemistry. They would know to, like, keep it in a cold, dark place, or, you don't expose it to UV light, stuff like that.
Yes, and they must have known it just based on the flavor or the behavior of it, because what happens when oils start to oxidize is the flavor gets worse. It gets kind of a rancid flavor.
Mhm.
Rancidity is a distinct and disgusting flavor that humans hate, but carrion eating animals love, like dogs and vultures. They love rancidity. Rancidity is not necessarily toxic, but it is a sign of food that's gone off and might be contaminated with bacteria that are relatively weak stomach acids might not kill.
Mhm.
That's why humans don't like rancid, rotten food, but other animals do. They're
Mhm.
adapted to it. So the rancidity flavor is a marker of also it's a convenient marker of oxidation, but they're not the same thing.
Yeah. Well, I always say humans are super smart. Like just because we had the same size brains, we were super intelligent. We just didn't use computers and iPhones, but we used that knowledge to learn about food and nutrition and how to have healthy children and all this. This is what you wrote about in Deep Nutrition, Weston Price stuff. All around the world, they did the same practices and they would give people organ meats and raw milk and all of these healthy things and they knew that it produced healthy offspring. And then on the opposite end, if we got these instincts of this olive oil got rancid, we left it out in the sun, or like that's probably not good for us. Like we figured this stuff out.
Yeah, and then along comes the American Heart Association and they say, no, no, ignore all of your instincts, right? And this is the problem with Ansel Keys because he was coming from a place of being overweight is a sin. You're a glutton and you
Mm,
are a sinner and a bad person.
mm.
And he reveals this in an interview that's published in 1961. And I take quotes from that where he says that if the fat man would only realize that he needs, basically more willpower. He's fat because of his own gluttony and lack of correct morals, right? And so this ties to the puritanical movement, right? It ties to religion. It ties to the idea of anything enjoyable or pleasurable is probably coming from the devil. So it's very deep-seated
Mm.
fear that you see today. It still lives in the Adventist church, in the Adventist hospitals, and the blue zones, and that whole Adventist idea of what a healthy diet is, and the Adventist medical organization called the American College of Lifestyle Medicine. They are basically following the same kinds of puritanical principles. And what it's doing is it's taking us away from all of that cultural science, that knowledge, the culinary knowledge that people had was truly a huge body of nutrition science that is completely ignored and destroyed by
It's
modern nutrition
yeah.
science.
This this is huge because we looked into this for the film Food Lies. We're including this. There's the Seventh Day Adventists. There's the Kellogg's. People have probably heard about the Kellogg story and its bland foods and his whole ideas. And it's going away from nature. I think a lot of this stuff, even veganism, modern veganism, is taking us away from nature and our natural instincts because for all of history we would have
Okay.
seen animals die, and it would be a normal part of like before you could talk, you saw a chicken being killed, and this is our food, and this is how we live, and we praised and we thanked nature, and we got this food, and now we're being separated from it. Everything to do with creating corporate food systems and industrial systems is kind of taking us away from nature and just taking our instincts away, and it's going opposite, and it always fails. It always This is how we get everything messed up.
Right. And so, like, the cholesterol theory of heart disease was really the nail in the coffin of separating humans from our traditions of culinary knowledge, while at the same time giving us like this worst possible poison in the form of vegetable oils, which are now 80% of the average American's fat calories. That's how, like, they are a slow acting poison. If they were a faster acting poison, we wouldn't be eating them. The only way that we could be in this situation is if they're just toxic enough to make us sick in, very many different ways, so we can't really understand what's going on. And slowly over years, they make us sick. Rather than what we usually consider a toxin will make you sick in a matter of minutes or hours.
That's what I always tell people, like how we got here. It's the processed foods in general, which are, mostly seed oils too. It's such a slow acting poison that we don't know it. And if we did know it, things would be different. But it's just a sad reality. You have to have this knowledge to realize that you have to think ahead. What humans are, it's hard for us to do, right? It's hard for you to like be like, wow, well, this Dorito tastes good now, but I mean, it's probably gonna make me unhealthy 10 years from now, 20 years from now, I'm gonna get heart disease if I keep doing this. We don't think that way.
Yeah, and well, it's once you have here's the thing that might help people because what vegetable oils do is they deplete your body's ability to handle small amounts of toxins, right? So, do this, vegetable oils deplete your own body's antioxidants. So, I talked about how oxidation, the root
Wow, that's interesting. Yeah, because all these people too, they're like, "Oh, the potato diet," or like, "I went raw vegan." Yeah, I'm like, "Yeah, I get it." That's kind of just mimicking nature throughout history. Yeah, what if you were stuck somewhere, there's, like, crazy weather conditions, and all you could eat were a few berries and leaves? Yeah, I get it. You can lose weight, I know. It's
Yeah,
simple, but
you're
that doesn't mean you do
eliminating.
it forever.
Right. Well, I mean, all of these diets that work when you do them for a short time, these elimination style diets, there was the cabbage soup diet, there was the grapefruit diet. What do they all have in common? No vegetable oils, no refined sugars, flours, or protein powders. Done. But those four things now compose more than 70% of the average person's total calories now. So that's why we're all sick, because 70% of our calories are these four defining ingredients in processed food.
Yeah. I thanks for waking us up. Let's go into the cellular stuff, even down to that level of like your cellular walls are made of fats. Like you need the correct fats.
Right, we can't live without polyunsaturated fatty acids because many of our cells are somewhere between 30 and 40% polyunsaturated fatty acids,
Mm.
and the other like 60 to 70% being other types of fatty acids like saturated and monounsaturated fatty acids. So we need to have quite an abundance in our diet. They're not inherently unhealthy. But when we don't have protective antioxidants in our cell membranes, and when we don't have the protective antioxidant enzymes standing by as guardians to protect our cell membranes, then we get in trouble. So I want to paint a little picture of here of what are the antioxidant enzymes, because I've mentioned them a few times, but I haven't really defined what
Mhm.
antioxidant enzymes are. Antioxidant enzymes are the most important defense against oxidation and things like free radicals, free radical cascades, polymerization, and chain reactions. These things are related to oxygen. Oxygen is a very high energy molecule, and oxygen actually is what ultimately kills every single cell in our body. We'll all die of oxygen toxicity. It's just that it's supposed to take, 100 years or so to kill us
Mhm.
off. But that's why we have tons of these antioxidant enzymes. The enzymes are like little biological machines that are made out of protein. They've got a lot of little moving parts. And at the center of every antioxidant enzyme is some kind of special atom that bonds to one of these free radicals or high energy oxygen molecules that can fly around and cause damage. It's like a little special catcher's mitt in the machine of the enzyme that catches these high energy molecules and takes their energy down a little bit by passing it off to another antioxidant. So antioxidants alone do nothing. Just taking vitamin C doesn't help your body fight oxidation. Just taking vitamin E
Mhm.
doesn't either. You have to take all of the vitamins, all of the minerals.
Mhm.
You have to have tons of protein in your diet, and you have to have a healthy functioning nucleus in every single one of your cells to be able to build those enzymes with the genetic instructions, right? So, what does that mean? It means you have to follow a healthy human diet in order to protect your cells and your cell membranes from destruction by oxygen.
So it's you need the food in the whole form. This is my big thesis too. It's like when you start messing with nature, things go south, right? So the whole processed food idea, it was kind of this hubristic idea that humans have, right? That we're like, oh, we can like take apart foods and put them back together again, and then we'll just add vitamin C and we'll add vitamin E, and then everyone's going to be good. Absolutely not. Nature has a ratio. All the foods have to be intact in their whole form in the right ratios for us to be healthy.
Right. And, it's not only that, when you take apart the food the way that we do, I describe it as like mining. We're mining for macros. If you think about it, you got like take your soybean, right? So you've got soy protein and soy oil now are how most Americans consume soy. And corn, we got corn syrup, corn oil are two macros.
Corn
That's
flour too,
how,
even
yeah, corn flour, corn starch, right?
yeah.
So, but those are the macros. You got the fat, carb, and the protein. Those are the four macros. And when you extract them the way that we do now, you're exposing them to oxygen. So they oxidize. They can, like, the proteins can actually oxidize. So plant proteins that people say are so healthy, like soy protein isolate, pea protein, because they've been removed from their protective antioxidant systems, they are partly oxidized, as just as is the case with the oils. So, but this is like lost on modern medicine. And it's lost on even these experts who are going around talking about ultra processed food. They're not making it as simple as it's just these four
Mm.
ingredients. And it's as simple as that, because when you eat just those things, you can't possibly control oxygen anymore. And they sit around in storage and they oxidize. They get cooked multiple times and they oxidize. What it's advertised as, protein or fat, soy oil, is not what you're actually consuming. There's huge contaminants in there that are toxic, because oxidized amino acids are as toxic as oxidized polyunsaturated fatty acids.
Mm.
Not, maybe not the same kind of toxicity, but they are also toxic. And that's just part of our food supply now, is all these toxins.
So, do you kind of have like this theory of everything? Not that everything is always explained by one thing, but the oxidized theory of disease. Does it kind of make sense? You're talking about heart disease and smoking, where there's all these things that contribute, but it's all kind of goes down to the same root cause.
Yeah, it is the grand unified theory of metabolic disease. Yes, right. I'm not saying it explains infectious disease, but and accidents, obviously,
Mhm.
but it is the grand unified theory of metabolic disease, because metabolism is all about energy. That's what our mitochondria do. That's Our mitochondria generate energy. They are the beating heart of our metabolism, and our mitochondria run on oxygen. Why we breathe, because our mitochondria use power of oxygen, smash bonds, and then capture the energy that's released. It's really amazing. But yeah, it all comes down to oxygen. Life on Earth almost died because of oxygen like 3 billion years ago, before biology invented antioxidants. So oxygen has been the root cause of death
Hmm.
for since there was death.
Wow. No, this it does make sense to me, and yeah, it goes down to the cellular level, and oh, I forgot what I was gonna say about that part. Yeah. What? Why do people not? So okay. So why don't people know this? Why aren't the mainstream doctors aware of this?
Well, it took me a long time to figure it out, and I didn't get it from somewhere. I didn't, like, pick it up and, see it lying down on the floor about
Uh-huh.
oxidative stress, but I did see a lot of different pieces. I knew about the toxicity of vegetable oils. I knew about the free radical theory of aging and disease. I knew about our cell membranes needing to be protected with vitamin E. I know that oxidative stress depletes vitamin E. I put all the pieces together, but it's complicated. It's been,
Mm.
you've been interviewing me for years, and as I've been continuing to research, this story has gotten more and more, like, simplified, actually, because the picture, the bigger the picture, the simpler the story, right? Like, I started with the 4 pillars of world cuisine, and I didn't know whether was worse than vegetable oil, or the other way around. I didn't know. But as the years have gone by, I've refined down. I've built, actually, this ball of knowledge. I
Mhm.
call it the ball of knowledge, where I
Mm.
fit, like, new pieces of information into the snowball and just keep rolling through more science as more science gets developed, or I come across it, gets bigger and bigger. And the ball of knowledge becomes more and more powerful at explaining more and more things. And that's what Dark Calories is. It's the biggest ball of knowledge yet.
I love it. No, that's what I do for food loss. I'm trying to just get it all into one place. And yeah, well, okay, maybe a better question is the research. A lot of these, there's like the nutrition bros that they're kind of like the mainstream, like I follow the science and I know better than everyone, and this is
Right.
what the studies say, right? So like how can all the studies kind of miss the fact that the vegetable oils, the seed oils are the problem?
That's a problem, because they're not looking at, they're looking at a tiny fragment of science, and they're not looking. They don't understand. They just don't know. They think that they don't understand science. If they don't understand that human clinical trials are not the ultimate form of science, they are one form of science, and they're not designed to answer nutrition questions. They're not good at that. Best at answering very simple questions about, does this drug work? Is this procedure better than that procedure? But nutrition questions are extraordinarily complicated. The studies need to go on for years. They're almost impossible to double blind because people tend to know what they're eating or figure it out. And food is complicated, right? And unless you are talking about foods, which then you're talking about processed foods. So you're talking about comparing two unhealthy diets. If you're talking about comparing, like vegetable oils versus olive oil, right? You're talking about comparing an unhealthy food versus a healthy food. Vegetable oil isn't food. It's something that's been mined, right? So it's not even a real nutrition study because those ingredients shouldn't be considered
Oh.
food.
Well, there's been very few, like, controlled long-term nutrition studies, and they
Five.
did do one, and you mentioned in the book is
There's
that
been five.
right? When there's a Chris Ramsden that, like, he dug up, they they actually did look at the polyunsaturated fats versus saturated, and people maybe had less heart attacks, but they died of other things more.
Yeah, and I mean, so women had more heart attacks. So, and a lot of data was missing or lost, and it could have.
With the vegetable oil arm, they had more
r-
heart attacks.
Yes,
Yeah.
right, exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, there was the best study ever done was the Minnesota coronary experiment, and because the results came out opposite of what was expected, Ansel Keys and his co-authors buried the data, and they never published it properly. They never published all of it. They published some of it. They cherry picked what they were going to publish. And then, Ramsden came along. Chris Ramsden at the NIH noticed that there was a study that was funded that was never published. And he did a lot of work to find the data. What survived was very clear that the more vegetable oil people ate, the more likely they were to die, period. And the thing that was so confusing to the authors was that, yeah, the vegetable oil lowered their cholesterol, but it made them more likely to die. They were more likely to die of infectious disease and cancer, and other studies have since corroborated that. Now, what happened, and this is what the bro scientists will never bring up, I don't know if they know, they just don't know it. But when that article came out, it was silenced, right? It's not that it wasn't well done. It was the best study ever done, will never be duplicated because we can no longer do things like that to prisoners without their consent. Or they weren't prisoners, they were in a mental institution. But yeah, so the best study ever done clearly showed lowering cholesterol with vegetable oils killed people. Bad idea. How was it silenced? Walter Willett of Harvard, one of the most well-respected, nutrition educators out there, said, "Oh, this is irrelevant. It has no bearing to today." He basically said, "Move along, folks. Nothing here to see." And the bro scientists fall for it, exactly as the processed food industry and the sickness industry would have them do.
Mhm.
So the bro scientists who are saying, "Oh, the clinical trials, human clinical trials, that's the main, science that, we should be looking at." They're not looking at the science because Walter Willett said not to. So they're not.
Mhm.
Talk about being a tool. And and they don't even know that there's four other studies, and they don't look at those either. Those are the only randomized clinical trials in humans that have gone on for multiple years. 5. Not very many, but they all failed to show vegetable oil was healthy. And most of them lean towards vegetable oil being not healthy.
Yeah, and Walter Willett also, it's just like he's very, like, plant-based, industry-funded guy that is just against everything that we stand for. Yeah, he's not an unbiased source of information.
Right. You wouldn't be in these positions of power if you were aligned with what actually, you know, what we're saying, because the American Heart Association created themselves as the authority back in the 1950s. Because if you wanted to be taken seriously, you had to align with the paradigm that saturated fat was bad. If you didn't, you would lose your job. You would be defunded. You wouldn't get grants. You would be kicked off committees. This was all documented. And that is why the American Heart Association's paradigm survives, because money enabled it to survive. And, money funds things that makes more money.
Mhm.
And preventative medicine, being healthy, creating healthy people, that doesn't make money for the healthcare industry. All the research is being done by people working for the healthcare industry. So there's an inherent conflict of interest.
Yeah. Well, we call it the sick care industry, but yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, and then also I think there's like confounding variables. So it's really hard to do these big studies that these people rely on, right? The mainstream people will love to rely on these big studies that don't can't control for everything. I don't think anyone's actually eating a healthy diet anyway, too, right? How many people are
right.
actually eating like we do? It's a single digit percent, right? Who are actually avoiding all the seed oils, actually avoiding processed foods, like very consistently eating, human appropriate diet.
Well, I mean, clinical trials are not the way to come to an understanding of what is a healthy human diet. Like, let's say you're starting from ground zero, you've got no idea, right? What are you going to do? You're going to literally have 3 generations of humans eating what? Nothing but, say, corn, right? Like, what? How are you going to do? There's too many variables.
Yeah.
If you think about it, there's no possible way you can define what a healthy human diet is with clinical trials. Why are we trying?
Well, I mean, I think they
It
just
makes
do
no
their
sense.
they can do kind of like fake versions to try to prove their point. Like the industry funded things will try to do what they do and try to get their result.
Exactly, right. They come in with preconceived notions. They have to support their benefactors. The only way to understand what a healthy human diet is to do something like what Weston Price did, which is to find healthy humans and figure out what they're eating.
And they found, yeah, to reiterate or to if people don't know, yeah, none of them had sugar, flour, oil in their diet. These were people, the only healthy population you could find are the people that were uncontacted by commerce, and they did not have the seed oils and the sacks of sugar and sacks of flour. They were eating natural foods.
And the closest that modern medical science comes to replicating what Dr. Price did, which was really the only thing that we should be paying attention to, is Dr. Price's research. The next closest thing we have are the blue zones. That book, which supposedly people, so the blue zones are areas where people supposedly live the longest. And I say
Mhm,
supposedly because they studied people in Loma Linda who didn't live as long as people live in Hawaii.
mm,
And they didn't study what people do in Hawaii. Why did they study people who live in Loma Linda, California? Because that's where the Adventist church was headquartered. And who was funding the Blue Zones book? The Adventist church,
mhm,
right? So this was a biased study. It was biased. It's just yet
mhm.
another example. So you can't have studies being funded by a vested interest, and yet all of our nutrition trials, just about,
Mm.
have been. Well, I mean, how many others? There haven't been any other studies that are like, let's look at healthy people and figure out what they're eating. There's just Weston Price.
I like this study. I don't remember what it's called or who did or what year at all, but they looked at the Seventh Day Adventists who did live a little longer than the average people because they had so many healthy practices. Right, these are just people dedicated to health, but then they compared them to a Mormon population that also did healthy lifestyle things like the Blue Zones. They had family connections, and they all these things. Right,
We also don't smoke, don't drink much.
they don't. Yeah, the Mormons don't have any restrictions on meat. The Seventh Day
Right.
Adventists do restrict meat. The Mormons didn't, and they lived just as long. Right? It's just that the average population that those are the people that are dying sooner because they're just eating this average diet. But if you look at the Seventh Day Adventist population and the Mormon population, they were equal. But the Mormons eat meat, so they tried to say that it was because they avoided meat. The Seventh Day
Right.
Adventists. Yeah.
Well, so like let's take it back to oxidative stress. If you want to design a study, you should be like focusing on stress as the like, does this diet control oxidative stress better than that diet?
Hmm.
Because we do know there's no dispute that oxidative stress is the root cause of all of these metabolic diseases, and it's all these the metabolic diseases that are killing us,
Hmm.
right? So all you have to do is look at, okay, well, does this or that factor in the diet promote oxidative stress or help control oxidative stress? And with the studies that these bro scientists are talking about, look at it through that lens.
Mm.
And so they get off track. They get distracted. And they're not actually most of the studies that supposedly debunk the idea that vegetable oil is unhealthy is not even studying vegetable oil. They've gone down that polyunsaturated fat, right? They've
Or they'll look at the wrong
broadened it.
endpoints too. They're like, "Oh, well, it
Yeah,
lowered cholesterol," but that's just that, like you said, is not even
right.
helping people.
Right, right. That's a surrogate endpoint, right? So the surrogate endpoint has nothing to do with stress, right? Does lowering, you can ask, does lowering cholesterol help you increase or decrease oxidative stress? Well, the chemistry would predict that lowering cholesterol would increase your oxidative stress for the simple reason that cholesterol is an antioxidant in our bloodstream.
And yeah, it's a good thing. It's and older people with higher cholesterol do better and they die less.
Right. That's another piece of evidence that gets ignored by these, flawed clinical trials that are flawed by confounding. They're flawed because they're not studying vegetable oil when they claim that they are. They're studying polyunsaturates or linoleic acid, but they're not saying, well, where is that linoleic acid coming from? Is it coming from whole foods or is it coming from refined soy oil? Many of the studies don't even make that distinction. And the worst offenders are the meta-analyses because the meta-analyses are studies of studies. The meta-analyses lump in 30, 40, 50 studies and would take a lot of work to figure out, okay, which ones of these is the diet actually comparing a vegetable oil versus a saturated fat-rich food like butter? Almost none of them, right? But they get lumped into the meta-analysis. And so that you basically can hide the truth behind these meta-analyses. They're not actually studying vegetable oil,
Mhm.
but they're studying people that are eating maybe more whole foods and less processed food.
Exactly. Well, that's my whole theory too, is even fiber, we think fiber's magical. I don't have a problem with fiber. I just think it's not a magical substance. It's an indigestible substance, insoluble fiber. It's just it means people who are healthy eat more whole foods. Right? It's like, yes, if you eat more whole foods, you will be eating more fiber and you will be healthier. That doesn't mean that this cellulose is magic.
Right, right. Yeah, they try to make it seem like it is magic by invoking the microbiome. Like the microbiome has become like this big black box of excuses for making anything seem either healthy or unhealthy. If it helps the microbiome based on one study,
No.
or if it hurts it, then it's either the answer to everything or the worst thing.
That's kind of funny. Well, there's also soluble fiber. I mean, yes, there are some fibers that are, yeah, good, fine. They can be beneficial, but I just think it's just like there is that correlation of people eating whole foods. That's the real ticket to health. And so
Yeah,
with all
that's
these
what we
studies,
know.
yes, we have all these flawed studies. We can't really do the real nutrition studies. It would take 100 years, 3 generations type of thing. So, but what we have is we can look at all the lines of evidence, right? If we look at all the lines of evidence, then we can kind of come up with what is a healthy human diet. And all the lines of human evidence includes Weston Price's work, it includes anthropological work, it includes way more things than the guys on the influencers on Instagram are looking at, right? Or the mainstream people. Then if you look at all the lines of evidence, it's very simple, right? It's ancestral foods.
Yeah. I mean, the whole problem started when we started getting away from cuisine and we started doing clinical trials. We were healthy before we started doing clinical trials. I think clinical trials might be the problem.
It it kinda is because that yeah, then it just pushes it's just like industry funded stuff that pushes it into their direction, and we go away
Yeah, and you
from
can use them, and there's a lot of statements made in these trials which aren't necessarily all fact checked. And the biggest lie, the first lie, is this one here. It's why I start the book with
mm,
this graph, which shows that at the beginning of the century we had very little heart disease, and we also ate very little vegetable oil. We ate more animal products. By the end of the 20th century, we had tons of vegetable oil. That's the big black graph,
mhm,
and we had way more heart disease. That's not shown because we know that
mhm.
everyone's dying of heart disease. It's the number one cause of death. And we are eating now less animal fat. And yet doctors don't learn that. And yet doctors learn the opposite. Doctors learn we are eating too much saturated fat and we're not eating enough vegetable fat. But look at this basic fact. This is the lie that started it all. And that's why it starts the book, because that this is a lie leads you to the truth.
Love it. I love it. I got a couple more. We can start to wrap it up here. This is great. because the linoleic acid, we talk about that, and you're saying that that's not the big problem, and I agree, right? It's like the linoleic acid is in natural foods, right? This is not what we're blaming on. It should be the oxidative products, the problems with seed oils being highly oxidized and the toxins, this and that. But what about the super high ratio? Could that be part of the problem? Or is it just the fact that you're eating a bunch of empty calories? Right? If you're
We
getting a
don't
huge amount of empty calories from seed oils that have no nutritional value, no antioxidants, then is that the problem? Or is it that for all of history, we had a low ratio? People talk about omega-6 ratio. They talk about the linoleic acid. It was only a couple percent in our diet, and
right.
now it's a way high percent. Could that be factoring in?
I don't think so. I don't think it's the ratio at all. Because if we had more omega 3 than omega 6, we would have the same problems with oxidative stress, except maybe worse, because omega 3 has more double bonds and is more readily oxidized. So I think the problem is that what you said, yes, we're eating the vegetable oils with toxins. We're also eating the vegetable oils have empty calories, but we're eating, like I said, 70% of our total calories are these refined foods, which are basically empty calories.
Mhm.
The carbohydrates just have sugar, and the proteins don't have anything other than the amino acids. So those are essentially empty calories. How do empty calories contribute to an oxidative stress? Because we need nutrients to control oxygen. We need nutrients. Nutrients are often antioxidants, and we need nutrients like amino acids to make those antioxidant enzymes that are going to have those little catcher's mitts to trap those high energy oxygen radicals so that they don't damage our cell membranes and kill our mitochondria, right? So that's how the processed food is making us sick. Does this ratio, like, we do have a lot of polyunsaturates now in our body fat, probably more than ever before in history, but we don't really know because we don't know, for example, the fatty acid composition was of Inuits or Eskimos or anybody like living on seafood in the Great North,
Mm.
where the seafood there is highly polyunsaturated. The temperature has a direct effect on the polyunsaturation. The farther north you go, the more polyunsaturates that plants need in order to stay fluid, right? So the farther north you go, you're going to find actually more polyunsaturates potentially in the diet because they concentrate in animal fats. And then, Eskimos and people in northern Russia and so on would have eaten very highly polyunsaturated diets. We just don't know. But they were whole food diets and they came along with all tons of nutrients.
That's what I was gonna say. That's the completely different story. If you're eating the whole food fish and it has the vitamin E, it has all the antioxidants, it's completely different from eating the devoid oils or any just devoid calories. Yeah, I'm big into this idea that the devoid calories, the empty calories are the biggest problem. It's like, what do people eat? What, like, people who get overweight, people who have insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes. It's not because they ate eggs and meat and nutrients. It's because they didn't eat those things. It's the lack of the nutrients and the quality protein and complete and bioavailable things, and it's just empty calories that your body doesn't know what to do with.
Yeah, it's energy that takes work for your body to manage. It's got to put it somewhere. It's got to store it somewhere. Alcohol, for example, another form of empty calories
Yep.
that it's a solvent, so it has its own toxic effects. That actually used to be associated with type 2 diabetes more strongly than, carbohydrates back before vegetable oils were in the food supply. The first cases of type 2 diabetes ever were in folks who drank too much,
Mhm.
right? So, yeah, empty calories have been the enemy of health all along, and processed food is empty
That's it.
calories.
It's so simple though. I don't get it. Yeah, alcohol too. It's just your body. It's like, what do I do with? And also your liver. I'm big into like your kind of liver centric view, right? Your liver has to process all this stuff and put it somewhere. And if you have all these excess empty calories, you're going to store it as visceral fat. It's going to be build up in your liver fat, right? There's even non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. It's like your body's just trying to figure out where to put all these empty calories.
Well, I think the nail in the coffin that of the idea that the keto diet is somehow the answer to everything is the fact that the most ketogenic most ketogenic diet you can follow is in alcohol
Mhm.
because alcohol makes you produce ketones, That's what they breathalyzers are. When you go to those
Mm,
breathalyzer stops,
mhm,
they're measuring ketones that you're breathing out because
mm,
alcohol makes your liver start producing ketones. And that's why people feel so great on alcohol because ketones are a wonderful energy for the brain. They're fantastic energy for the brain, just like sugar. A sugar buzz and an
mm,
alcohol buzz
uh-huh.
kind of feel similar as far as your brain is concerned.
Yeah, and oh, man. Alright. This is great. I hope people got some good knowledge out of this. Just pretty simple stuff. Avoid these unnatural, highly processed things that we just invented, and, yeah, you're gonna be good.
Yeah, and, I mean, the reason I want people to read Dark Calories is because I really want them to understand that the truth is fairly simple. There's a little bit of chemistry, just a few chemical terms,
Mhm.
but once you master that, have the confidence to sit in your doctor's office and just let him talk his talk about how cholesterol is toxic and you need to, take your statin drugs, and just have the confidence to say, "Thank you very much, but I don't believe that, and I'm going to my healthy ancestral diet."
Mhm, and when Doctor Gate's a doctor, she was a Lakers nutritionist. She knows what she's talking about. There's so many other doctors that you can go to or refer to for this, and yeah, I thank you again for you changed a lot of professional sports teams and getting them on more ancestral diets.
Yes, I mean, it was great working with the Lakers because they loved the food, right? They thought it was the best food in the NBA when they were,
Mm.
enjoying our ancestral food. They didn't know anything about that. They just knew that it was Dr. Kate approved and that it sure tasted great.
Of course, because humans like to eat meat and all this stuff
Right.
for a reason. And well, thank you again for all your work. And yeah, check out Dark Calories. And yeah, we'll see you again soon, I'm sure.
Yay, thank you. I'll be back anytime.